Welcome to Data versus Commerce, where we explore the messy middle between database and doorstep. I'm Matt Johnson.
And I'm Floyd Blaikie. Let's dig in.
Guys, welcome back. Dan, I'm so excited to get into a conversation with you today about what's happening in the world of retail and agentic commerce. And I thought before we started this conversation, I thought it might be fun to just tell you a little bit of an anecdote about an experience that I had recently, real experience around agentic shopping. So, sitting with my kids one night and I said, hey guys, we launched this new podcast. And, I was, looking at myself on the camera and I'm like, I look so basic, and of course I'm asking my teenagers, so I'm trying to get their feedback. And I'm like, I look so basic, I'm just another bald guy with a beard, what can I do to amplify my style? And they said, well, why don't you ask ChatGPT? And so that's what I did. I took a picture of myself and uploaded it to ChatGPT. And I said, hey, I need to revamp my style. I need a totally different look. Like, what are some things that would work for me? And it gave me back some really good suggestions. I mean, one of them was get glasses, but then I'm like, I'll look just like Dan, so I can't do that. But it gave me back really good suggestions. And then I was like, okay, I like this. But where should I get those? Like, I don't want to spend a fortune. I'm not going to go to Nordstrom's, but I don't want, some Chinese knockoff. So tell me, where do I get it? And it sent me back a list of links in different storefronts. And it got me thinking, how does it know which storefronts to send me to, right? And why were some visible in there and why weren't others? And I'm pretty sure there wasn't any ads going on. If there was, then, I have a complaint, but maybe there is. But you're here to fill us in, Dan. Dan, what's up with that? How's this whole thing work?
Fascinating question. So in my role as, had our industry lead for retail, I spent a lot of time over the last few months trying to figure that out. And it is like the question I get from our retail customers. They're trying to figure out in the first place why they're even getting traffic from ChatGPT or Perplexity or Gemini, because in many cases, up until a couple of months ago, they weren't doing anything in particular to drive traffic out of the AI platforms. And in other cases, they want to know how to get recommended. And it's really a very interesting rabbit hole to lose a lot of your life down, trying to figure out how these large language models determine why they're sending me to, my local running room store as opposed to some other place. And I guess it kind of unwraps in layers. If you use ChatGPT a lot and it's relatively present on your device, it does kind of keep track of where you go and maybe where you shop or your preferences. So it's possible that some of those results are based on somewhere you went, visiting recently, just in terms of trying to get a sense
of library, because it recommended glasses.
And but beyond that, it looks at a number of different components to decide who to recommend and then why. And so much like a human shopper, it's trying to solve a mission of, what are you looking for? How quickly can you get it? What's the best price? And so it's trying to optimize this model, especially in a general search like you've provided, which is, hey, I want to change my look around, give me some ideas. Now give me some stores that represent those ideas, versus a more specific mission like, hey, I'm looking for, a specific black shirt and maybe check these 5 stores, right? In which case it's a different scenario. But the first thing it'll look at is the core product data. Let's say we're looking for the shirt, that magnificent shirt you're wearing today, Matt, right? Find me a black shirt, in this size. Those 2 dimensions are the first thing it'll look for. Okay, so who has this shirt in this color, in my size? And it'll usually try to do it. And then the next thing it'll start to look at is price, availability, and then trust signals like return policies and certifications about what the product quality is, where it's made, where it's manufactured, where is it sustainable, different things that drive consumer decision making. And the last thing it'll start to look at, and this came more to the fore in the last couple of months, is it looks for third-party references to validate that information that this store is a place I should recommend to you. And so, if it's someone like Nordstrom, for example, it doesn't necessarily know Nordstrom's brand positioning, or, it doesn't care about any of that because it's a machine. But it will look for reference sites in, say, Vogue or GQ or Reddit that say, yes, Nordstrom is a high quality seller. That's the place that people go for, good quality, higher price items. And I'm going to recommend it because there's one near you. And I can see that the inventory is available, and it's at a price point that you've indicated is something that you're willing to pay.
I think there's a really interesting disconnect between, Matt, what you tried to do with ChatGPT, and then Dan, what you were saying about how it looks for information. So when Matt bought his beautiful black collared shirt, he probably bought it the old fashioned way. But he could have gone and typed in, I need a black button down shirt. Here's the sizes, specs. But he didn't. He did a vibes based search, right? He went on to ChatGPT and said, hey, how do I make myself, look cool? He roasted you a little bit in the process, Dan. Like, I don't know if you just stand for this bald guy with a beard hate, but you can sort that out offline.
It takes one to know one.
That's very much kind of like a vibes sort of thing. It's very subjective. And I think that a lot of retailers have invested a lot in this, right? Because, Matt's probably going to be swayed by like beautiful lifestyle photography. Matt's going to be swayed by a brand story because, he's trying to become something. It's inherently an emotional search. Sorry, Matt, but it is. So how does that work in agentic commerce search? Do AI agents care about all of that?
They don't care so much about, they care about it in the context of looking for a third party signal to indicate that this is a brand or a store to recommend. They don't care that, the copy that might be on the website of that retailer creates this amazing, emotional association to the shirt, and it's going to make you be the most coolest, amazing person ever. That it's not going to care about. But it will look for the way we think of information, and certain adjectives that we would associate that are kind of meaningless to a machine, like soft or, the drape or things like this. Those become attributes that need to be added into the product information in a way that the language model is going to be able to interpret it, so that when the search is something like, hey, I'm looking for a winter jacket that, is really puffy and warm and the rest, it can go and figure that out based on a down fill rate and a temperature rating. And so there's an interpretation there that needs to happen. The other thing that, when all this AI stuff came out and we all started talking about it, and you see this all over LinkedIn, data is the key thing. If you don't have product data, your company, you'll never be found. Mm-hmm. That's only partly true. What we found running our agentic readiness assessment for our retail clients and other companies we work with is, first thing is, you better make sure your security settings aren't set in such a way that they block all robots. Right? So robots.txt, there are many, many sites that are set up for fraud and denial of service and other cyber security reasons that just stop Perplexity, stop ChatGPT, stop Gemini from even coming to your site. And so the first step is, hey, I need to let these things in, keep out the malicious actors, because otherwise you won't even be considered to start with. You'll just be skipped. The next layer is the product information, the basic unit of measure, UPC codes, GTIN, looking for a pair of size 8.5 Saucony gel Kayano running shoes. Yes, this is in fact this product. And then it moves on to get information that is stored in other places, but that matters to completing the mission in terms of, inventory availability, shipping costs, taxes, other elements of that. But the emotional elements of it still remain important when, as a seller, you can train these models to look for you. There are ads coming out, Matt, to the comment to the joke you made earlier. Ads are starting to come out. I think it's ChatGPT or Gemini for sure. They will be at Google eventually, but ChatGPT has started it, where you can influence the models to some degree with ads. But even beyond that, to get the recommendation does require content marketing, because the models look at that content marketing, and you can train the models to look for certain keywords so that they will recommend you. And it takes time, and there are tools out there that help you monitor how you're doing. And the other big difference is most people use an example like Matt's now when they're going shopping on ChatGPT or going for a search. They have a wide open context and intent, as opposed to an SEO type search, which is very specific, usually to a kind of product, at least, if not a brand or a store. These are intent oriented, meaning I'm going to a wedding, I'm going to a beach wedding in July. What should I bring? Right?
Right.
That's wide open. And trying to understand whether or not you're going to show up in these prompts and which prompts are resulting in the models recommending your store or your brand over someone else has become a big part of what marketing and merchandising teams are starting to try to figure out.
So
That
I'm
makes
not
so
I'm
much
not
sense.
losing.
Yeah. And while, it's the percentage growth in traffic is high, what we've seen talking to our retail customers is the numbers aren't necessarily high. They're not selling millions through these channels yet, but it's growing fast. And so they end up with yet another channel to support. So at first it was my store and the, analog advertising
Yep.
we all know and love. Then it became e-commerce and how do I influence the search engines to find me and my site and what do I do on my site? Then we had social channels. How do I sell through and promote myself either through influencers or ads or other things in TikTok and YouTube and Instagram? And now there's another channel. And this channel has its own behavior and its own quirks and things that need to be put in place to influence it. And the marketing race just continues and expands. And then it becomes a question of where should I spend my dollars and and how can I get the most bang for my buck? The good thing is that at least as it relates to on-site information, so product data, availability, price, all of that also helps SEO. So it's not like I've got to have, all this investment is only down one channel. It helps all of it. And so there's benefit to be gained across the effort.
Can that be measured yet? Because my background is marketing, so I can go into a tool and I can see, am I number 3 or number 4 for this high intent search term? But I don't think there's really a way for retailers to do that with LLM search. How can they know that it's working so that they can double down on that channel if
There are emerging platforms out there that are measuring your recommendation rates. So how much are you getting recommended versus others? Where's that traffic coming from? And the prompts that are resulting in your brand or store coming up. Some of the platforms like Shopify have recently released embedded analytics that show your traffic coming from the different LLMs in addition to all the other channels. So as part of that referral traffic, the key missing piece in the journey from an LLM to your store is the scenario where I don't click through. And so trying to figure out the attribution of somebody went and did a search on, let's say, ChatGPT and came up with a bunch of examples, and I chose to go to ABC Store. If I exit ChatGPT and then go straight to ABC Store, then I don't know necessarily where it came from.
Right.
And so in those scenarios, companies are starting to try to figure out by looking at the shopping journey from their site, trying to gauge, because those people who are coming from ChatGPT to the store have a very high intent. They're going to move down the funnel to convert much faster, and we're seeing that. Referrals from the LLMs have convert at a much higher rate than they do through organic or paid search. But it is still a bit hard to attribute, and there's still a lot of effort going on to try to figure out how you're ranking, how to continuously train those models so that you don't fall behind. And like we did with SEO, continuously make sure that all the keywords that could be out there are there. Now it's which prompts and in which scenarios am I showing up. And you can get pretty specific with them with some of these tools, down to you can introduce personas and segments into them as well to see if your target segment is actually being influenced by the effort you're putting out. But it is certainly early days to figure out this race.
Dan, this all makes so much sense. One of the things I was thinking about as hearing you talk about conversion and everything, through LLMs, was the fact that as consumers, we're changing our buying behavior. We're changing the way we think. I think for so many years we've been just overrun by so many options that, at least from my own personal experience, going and having my chat GPT tell me exactly the 5 shirts and 2 pairs of jeans, that I need to buy, to me, that is an unbelievable time saver. Instead of spending hours potentially shopping or going to different stores in person. What does this, trend to AI tell us about the consumer, and how do retailers need to think about where to spend their time, particularly I think around content marketing, you said, because isn't that where this context is coming from? How does it know that I like rugged industrial outfits? if there is not some sort of rugged industrial blog or Reddit, thread out there.
That's exactly right. So I think it's somewhat category dependent. Like if you think of of all the different things that we buy as consumers, some lend themselves to this AI agent really easily because they're very defined and very repetitive. So I think of grocery as like a prime candidate where, my list is already in my grocery app. If it takes me 5 minutes to place my order every week and have it delivered, it's a lot. The extra step of, hey, order the same stuff and add, a watermelon this week because I'm having a picnic, all through voice command when it gets there, is a major time saver with categories that are very well defined like that. And there's many consumer categories like that when you think of, hardware stores and other things that are very less emotional driven and more specification driven. And those become very important when it comes to the data piece and figuring out as a retailer in those categories how to make sure that I'm going to be the one that gets chosen. In fashion, apparel, home furnishings, things that are a little more emotionally oriented and have a lot of style and taste to them, becomes a bit different. But I think in many ways, it comes back to the age old question of brand, right? If you are a brand oriented company, you are going to continue to need to invest in brand and brand awareness and brand positioning so that the consumer actually puts you into the search criteria, right? You want to be a favorite who's there and recommended. And if not, then it becomes much like it is today. How do I get into that consideration set? What do I need to know about those models to get there? In some ways, depending on the category, sellers who've been selling on Amazon for all these years have a bit of a leg up because they're playing the same game in the LLM models that they're playing in Amazon, leaving the ads aside for the moment. All about how do I get to the top of that list? It's all about the content and the product and the trustability and the visuals and the rest of that. In the LLM context, still need to understand what those are. That's going to get you to the top of that recommendation list. Those who don't compete in that channel or in marketplaces, they have that dual challenge of brand awareness, positioning across different sources, as well as their own content on their own website to make sure that, I could be recommended, I could have the product, but if I don't have shipping policies, I'm going to get lowered in the recommendation list than someone who has very clear shipping policies that are advantageous to the consumer.
The marketer in me loves to hear that brand isn't dead, loves to hear that the content is still important. And I think we've barely scratched the surface. I think, Dan, especially with the level of your expertise and how you can optimize for that kind of agentic search. But I don't know, let's meet a lot of retailers where they're at because this is so new. I think step one is just making sure you show up at all. So if you're an e-commerce leader, if you're in charge of merchandise, if you're in charge of digital, what do you check tomorrow to make sure that you're showing up in the first place?
You check the basics of product information and making sure that it's complete in terms of the attributes that the models will be looking for to confirm that this thing that the shopper is looking for is in fact at your store. You check the other information that rounds out that decision in terms of price, inventory availability. If pickup in store or delivery to me is important, is there store inventory that can be surfaced as well? And as a second step, start looking at the places that you're going to be cross-referenced and make sure that you're showing up. Some of it is also geography based. Most of these models are trained in the United States, and so there's much more content about them, about the brands in the United States if you operate there. If you don't operate there, you're at a bit of a disadvantage in some ways. Something to consider for global operators who sell into North America. But really, it comes down to the basics of product data first, and then the contents on your site, and other information we don't necessarily think about as marketers that determine that decision-making online. Price, availability, and other policies that influence my decision to buy from you.
Man, this has been so great, Dan. I think we really need you to come back and tell us more about, what this looks like in terms of converting, right? It's one thing to get found, right? And then I think we can talk about the other end of it in terms of what does a good customer experience look like? What do we need on the page to make a decision? But this was so helpful. Thank you.
It was my pleasure.
Thanks, Dan.
Looking forward to coming back. Thanks for having me.
See ya.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Data versus Commerce. New episodes drop weekly.
So if you're responsible for any part of how products get from a database to a doorstep, subscribe now on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen.